Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 5 of the Engager Energy Rights Forum, which is dedicated to energy poverty in the context of COVID-19. Like in the previous days of the forum, we will have Luisa making the graphical recording of the day. We have these wonderful pictures of every day with very insightful results that are worth looking in a very detailed way, I think. And you can find them at the library section at our website. So regarding the topic for today, I think we have an interesting session lined up. And you can consider every discussion we had so far to be important for our age and time. I believe the topic to which we dedicate this session is one of the most timely. Today we are analyzing the impact of the pandemic on energy poverty across Europe. Our intention is to look into what are the major concerns and policies and measures that could lead to ensure affordable and continuous access to energy supply, not only during this crisis, but also look beyond to what is coming in the near future. In order to do that, we have a very interesting group of speakers that will briefly present the results of household surveys, practical evidence from the field, and policy solutions in different national contexts. We'll begin with presentations, which will be followed by some questions and answers. Of course, you can write your questions to the speakers anytime in the chat. We will be very grateful if you can indicate what speaker is the question for. Feel free to use the chat whenever you feel like. Then after a short break, our colleague Marlies will guide us to the work done in the Engager COVID-19 energy map, which will also serve as an introduction to the interactive session that follows, and where the participants will be actively involved in the discussions in breakout rooms. We challenge our speakers to present some insights from their studies in a 5-minute presentation each. We are going to have 4 presentations. And the first speaker is Vicky Tzega. I hope I'm saying this correctly, which is a lawyer at the Greek consumer organization EXPISO. I hope this is right also, where she dedicates our time on advising on consumer protection cases and energy poverty related policies issues. Vicky, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon from Athens. I would like to thank you for the invitation in order to discuss and find the appropriate solution and synergies for energy poverty issue that is a global phenomenon. It's clear that people have been severely hit by the pandemic and will further suffer from the economic downturn. Many have lost money and worry how to cope with their bills. At the same time, already, vulnerable consumers are being exploited by rough commercial practices, often targeting emotional vulnerability. Consumers are witnessing also disruption in the energy supply, as we faced also here in Greece, according to our survey that I'm going to also to represent right now. Energy for All is our program that we're running in EXPISO since 2018. It's a program that is concerning the energy sector and also the energy poverty issue that we are facing here in Greece. I cannot go next slides. Okay, thank you. EXPISO is a non-profit organization based in Athens, and our scope is to improve and protect the consumer concerning the rights in energy, but also in Europe also field. We focus on energy poverty issues in Greece, and as I have already mentioned to you, our vision is to reduce energy poverty by trying to improve legislation, to enforce also framework. And our purpose is to ensure that all the consumers' rights are acceptable and during also the pandemic. And also we provide them the appropriate information and education, because our scope is to activate all the consumers for their energy rights. We intervene through this because our main scope is to educate and to raise the awareness of the consumer for energy rights. Also with for the consumers, we are supporting in legal, also technical issues that they are facing every day with in energy sector, also in energy poverty issue, because it's a most sensitive also issue. And we advocate and lobby with relevant authorities and with energy providers in order to find the most appropriate solutions for the consumer. And we are also gathering also and we are also seeing for strategic partnership also here, but also in Europe, in order with other stakeholders and other European also consumer organizations, in order to also to share the most suitable solutions. Next, please. Okay, our survey that we conducted here in Greece, it was during the summer for almost 1 month, from 15 June to 15 July of 2020. This was of the result of many complaints that we received during the pandemic issue in energy sector. And more than 50% of our survey, people were between 46 to 60 years old. And 41% belongs to vulnerable social groups, such as unemployed, long-term unemployed, single-parent families, people with disabilities, large families, uninsured people with chronic conditions, and elderly, and also final also students. 40% was financially affected by the pandemic. It's a very big percentage here in Greece. According to the prioritized monthly spending, electricity ranked third after food and health medicine. This is a very good example for us in order to push our government to share the most valuable issues here for energy issues here in Greece, and this the third prioritized according to their RACs. It was a very good element that is energy is a very is a common issue and it is very important for lives of the citizens. 62% started increasing their energy consumption during the quarantine period. 45% took several measures to save energy, only replacing bulbs or proper using of electronic energy, proper shading, temperature control, use of nighttime tariffs. Unfortunately, only 2% they have made small energy upgrades of houses, even though now in Greece it's running a national aid. The name is Saving at Home program from the government, and now with they're thinking also to change a little bit the program because of the several issues that the houses they faced during the pandemic, and they say that the percentage was very small. This is the reason that they are continuing now to have this program also in this spring. 22% was not able to be consistent in timely payment for their bills. This is a very huge percentage. 60% have made temporary repayment arrangement with energy providers. 6% did not pay, and 11% of them experienced unfortunately electricity disconnection. More than 50% answered that the government did not take appropriate measures regarding their energy needs, and while 61% believe that support measures taken by energy providers were not satisfactory. This is the reason that after this survey, we have made an official letter to our government in order to find the most appropriate solutions for the consumers, for the energy consumers. Next, please. Our conclusion of this survey was that we noticed that there is a lack of trust from consumers towards government, also energy suppliers. Many people are affected with significant economic damage. There is a consumer lack of information and education on energy consumption, also rights. There is a huge inability to pay electricity bills in due time during the pandemic. Energy poverty, there is a big percentage of energy poverty still in Greece and energy exclusion. And it's the right time now to set up schemes in order to help energy poor households to invest in energy efficiency measures. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Vicky, for your presentation. I think the numbers you presented are really, really powerful and indicates that the impact in Greece is, and I think will be, very significant. And I also like to highlight the conclusions regarding the importance of trust in the government and energy suppliers, together with the need for more information and energy literacy for the consumers. I think this is really important insights. Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is William Baker. He provides strategic advice to the Horizon 2020 Solutions to Tackle Energy Poverty, which is the STEP project, and is the Energy Advice Development Lead at Citizens Advice, the largest independent advice provider in England and Wales. William is also a trustee of the Fuel Poverty Research Network. William, please take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo, and thank you for the invitation to speak at this forum. I'm going to start off with talking about some of the research that Citizens Advice has carried out. We've carried out quite a few surveys, but I think one in particular we carried out with Ofgem, the energy regulator in the UK. Could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this found that nearly 7 million households are struggling to pay their energy bills because of the pandemic. And in November 2020, 2.1 million households were behind on their energy bills, which is 600,000 more than February 2020. 16% of prepayment meter consumers, these are people who pay as they go for their fuel, weren't able to top up because they couldn't afford to. So that means that essentially that if they don't top it up, they go without fuel. So it's not what we call a statutory disconnection. It's often referred to as a self-disconnection. Another problem we found is that because quite a few suppliers have gone for a sort of digital first policy approach in terms of consumers contacting them, 1 in 7 consumers were not able to contact the supplier as a result of this policy. Furthermore, with many people confined to the home due to lockdown, self-isolating, home working or being furloughed from their jobs, it's not surprising that home energy consumption has shot up. Nottingham Trent University research found that consumers confined to their homes were spending on average of £45 extra per month on their energy bills. And of course, the problem is even worse for people living in homes with poor insulation and heating systems. Many are likely to go cold rather than turn on the heating because of concerns about their fuel bills. But also the economic impacts of the pandemic has led to a large rise in unemployment. The End Fuel Poverty Coalition calculated last summer that this has resulted in 200,000 more households living in fuel poverty. That's in addition to about the 3 million already in fuel poverty. And this was before the further economic shock that we've experienced because of the 2 further lockdowns we've had over winter. We don't have any evidence yet of a precise relationship between fuel poverty and COVID-19, but we do know that there's a strong relationship between cold homes and ill health in general, and particularly with respiratory illnesses. And the evidence shows that cold homes hinder the capacity of people's immune systems to fight off viruses. They may exacerbate symptoms for people with viruses, and of course, they undermine recovery for those returning from hospital after receiving treatment. And what we do know is that there's a very strong relationship between deprivation and susceptibility to COVID-19 and to mortality rates. So the Office for National Statistics found that mortality rates from COVID-19 in deprived areas are more than double those living in less deprived areas. Next slide, please. So I'm going to say a few words about how energy advice can tackle some of these problems. Since the device itself runs a number of different energy advice services, and I've listed some of them at the bottom of this slide. I just focus on the Solutions for Tackle Energy Poverty project. This involves 3 local citizens advice in the country with support from myself in the national office. And we provide advice to consumers, we run consumer workshops, we train frontline workers. It's the same approach with all the STEP partners. But what we found, of course, is that pandemic has meant we've had to shift from providing face-to-face advice, which many people in vulnerable circumstances and on low incomes prefer, to telephone and web advice. So we've tried to address this through providing videos and providing training facilities, but it's still a lot of people struggle with those sorts of ways of providing advice. We've also focused on providing low and no cost, what we call low and no cost energy saving measures. We recognise that only makes a small impression on tackling energy poverty. And so what we want to see is far more reaching solutions from government, from energy suppliers and from municipalities. So next slide, please. I should say that energy advice aims to address the 3 main causes of fuel poverty, i.e. low income, high fuel costs and poor energy efficiency standards. But of course, it can only help those energy poor consumers access existing provision, whether that is, for example, welfare benefits, social tariffs, or grants for energy efficiency programs. And this is where advocacy is so important. What we know is that fuel poverty is increasing, and in the worst case, we're seeing more and more people having to rely on food banks and on fuel vouchers. So it manifestly shows provision isn't sufficient. So in terms of, I referred in the beginning about some of the issues Citizens Advice has found through his research. And its central campaign, I suppose, is to address the poverty element of energy poverty, and that is that the temporary £20 per week uplift that the government introduced to the universal credit welfare benefit in response to the pandemic, that uplift should be made permanent. And it make an important contribution to addressing that poverty that energy poor consumers face. Of course, we know that many will still struggle to afford basic necessities, even with that uplift. It's received massive support from a wide range of organisations. The government recently agreed a 6-month extension, but hasn't yet agreed to make it permanent. So we're still going to be campaigning on that. With respect to energy poverty itself, the STEP project in the UK is part of the broad-based End Fuel Poverty Coalition. In May last year, the coalition started our COVID-19 campaign, which urged the government to make tackling energy poverty a major priority of its response to the pandemic. We had 4 key asks. Rapid rollout of large-scale energy efficiency programme as a priority for providing a green stimulus to the economy. Delivery on existing government commitments on the warm home discount, which is a sort of social tariff, and it's the energy efficiency programs that are promised in its manifesto. Immediate improvement of energy standards in the private rented sector, which has particularly high energy poverty rates, and fuel poverty debt relief. And we specifically called for debt relief rather than deferral. We have seen deferral procedures put in place, but we just think many people just won't be able to run up huge debts and they just won't be able to pay them off. So we'd like to see them written off. We have seen some response from the government to an extent, certainly on the first 3 asks. For example, we introduced the Green Home Grants Energy Efficiency Programme as part of its emergency measures to boost the economy, which was so badly hit by the pandemic. But I'm afraid this provides grants up to £10,000 for £10,000 for energy poor households, £5,000 for other households. But it has had a very shaky start to its major delivery programmes. But we are seeing more programmes come on stream in 2022. But as I say, what we are concerned about is a tsunami of debt, and it's all debt, but fuel poverty and fuel debt in particular. And that's, we think, needs addressing immediately. And that's so that's our sort of short-term call with a long-term call for big improvements in energy efficiency standards. And I've finished there. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Very interesting presentation. I think the numbers are quite impressive and really highlight the importance of energy advice and being in close proximity with the consumers in order to be effective. Now, our next presentation is from Carolina Gouveia, which is a legal advisor at the Legal and Economic Studies Department of DECO, the Portuguese Association for Consumers Protection. Carolina, please, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation to DECO to take part on this forum. It's an important debate, and definitely energy is one of the most concerning issues in the pandemic. And I think that most of us felt how important it is to have a comfortable house in these times. So we are also partners in STEP project, like William already presented a bit of the project. So I will focus a bit on what we've been doing in Portugal regarding this project. So when the pandemic hit, we were in the beginning of implementing the project, and it was quite difficult to adjust to this new reality of working from home and not being personally in direct contact with consumers that we received in our headquarters in Lisbon, but also spread across the country. And so we decided to keep up with the project, of course, and to adjust to the new reality, like William mentioned, to adjust to the telephone advice, and also to try Skype advice and other kinds of mods to get to the consumer. And regarding what we did, so we give information and advice to consumers in several sectors. So energy is one of them. And since energy poverty, we are dealing with vulnerable consumers, we decided to have a support office dedicated to energy as a specificity. So what we do, consumers directly reach us asking for an energy advice session, or when we receive complaints for consumers, we see that there is a problem with a high bill, or there is a problem with disconnection, or other kind of issues that the consumer is requesting, and then we refer them to our energy support office. In this session that usually takes up to an hour, we apply 2 questionnaires if the consumer gives its consent, where we try to collect data and know more about their energy consumption, about their income, the equipment they have or they don't have, the housing conditions, and then also a second questionnaire on the impact on health that William also mentioned is quite important to realize and to have numbers on the impact that energy poverty has on consumers' health. And then in the end of the session, we give recommendations of measures that the consumer can apply in their house. And we sent a written document with the summary of the measures that we recommend. We think this is a good strategy. So the consumer has in their hands the summary of what we mentioned, of what was the measures recommended in the session. And 6 months later, we contact again for a follow-up session. So we try to know if they were able to apply the recommendations, or if not, what were the obstacles they felt, and what was the impact of the measures that they were able to apply. How we did this during a pandemic year. So first we built our training program for energy advisors. At DECO, we have 35 frontline workers dealing with consumers every day. So we give them training specific for energies, for energy efficiency measures, and and just for energy poverty and support schemes that are available in the country. And now we are applying the same program to other energy advisors working in energy agencies, municipalities, social workers, so different sectors of activity that are dealing with vulnerable communities or with consumers that in situation of energy poverty. So this is an image how we were able to adjust and to continue our training and our models during a pandemic on the internet with Zoom sessions that we are all a bit tired of, but we had to do it. And this is a scheme that was built on STEP project. This scheme is the same for all for all the partners, but of course with some adjustments to their own reality. So on the first set of measures are measures concerning the national reality. For Portugal, we have the energy social tariff. We have advice on switching tariffs, time of use tariffs, and on some support schemes that can be available in each country. And then we have no cost or low cost efficiency measures that are quite easy to do at home. It can be draft proofing of windows, of doors. It can be the correct usage of curtains, and then simple things like turning off the lights and things like this. This kind of recommendations that are still useful. And most consumers, we had consumers that we were speaking and they say, oh, it's winter, it's cold, I close everything. And even on a sunny day, they were not receiving the sunlight in the house. And then we have high cost measures, which can be replacement of windows. It can be better insulation, and then it can be equipment. And this, in most cases, require that a support scheme is available so we can recommend and make the advice and the guidance so the consumer can apply for the support scheme. And then regarding COVID. So this was also one of the first concerns when lockdown started in March last year, so 1 year ago, was to make sure that consumers were protected in their most basic services. So most people were not allowed to leave their houses to go and pay their bills. Most people, especially the more vulnerable consumers, couldn't go to a shop and pay their energy bill or their water bill, and they cannot get disconnected. It was the worst thing that could happen to those people. So the first thing that we did was to create a set of measures and send letters to our parliament, to our government, to national regulators, requesting minimum set of measures to protect consumers on energy, but also on other basic services. And the first set of measures that we had in the country was the prohibition of disconnection due to lack of payment, this possibility to set installment plans and to have a 3 months moratorium for its payment, and then a deadline to pay the energy bills that was extended to 50 days instead of the regular 30 days. And then again, we have a second set of measures right now from January until the end of June. Again, a prohibition to have energy cuts, and then possibility to set installment plans again, but now according to current income. And there was an additional support on the energy bill since we had extreme cold weather in the beginning of January. This support, we could think that it was a good measure, but actually it was so low, and people were expecting a bit more. But in the end, it was a measure. And then eligibility to social tariff is now reviewed every month, and we had the regular. The regular measure was that this eligibility to social tariff was reviewed every 3 months, but we thought that it was necessary to have more flexibility because people were losing their salaries and were getting eligible to social tariff, but they had to wait 3 months until they had access to it. We also did a special guides for consumers during COVID. So what are the exceptional rights for the consumers? There's a link to the guide if you want. I can share. So if you want to see it, so it goes for the most basic service, water, energy, and telecom sector, because this exceptional, it was really difficult to get information because there were so much laws and exceptional regimes coming out every day that we decided to compilate and make some frequently asked questions and some examples of what consumers could do. Our current concerns, and a bit connected to what William already mentioned, is the level of debt related with energy bills. We don't have as much data as William has because it's not always easy to get data. But what we did was to have meetings with all the biggest energy suppliers. And yes, indebtedness is a really big concern. There was a lot of people going for installment plans, but these installment plans will add up to other expenses that families already have and to current bills as well. So now there is a prohibition to disconnection until the 30th of June, but what happens next? We are also expecting a tsunami, but of disconnections, unfortunately, after the 30th of June. We will be monitoring this and, of course, advising and helping consumers as much as we can, and lobbying, of course, for protection measures when available and when necessary. And at the same time, the government is now developing a strategy to fight energy poverty in the country, which will be something new. And some new support schemes are coming, and we don't know if they will be the most adequate, but we are following up on this. So yes, I think this year will be the year that we will really feel the impact of COVID on the energy indebtedness. And then, of course, energy poverty is going even more aggravated with all that happened during lockdowns that continue to happen. So thank you, and I'm available for all the questions and everything that may be necessary.
Thank you, Carolina. I think one of the questions you raised and that I found most important is despite the efforts in supporting consumers during this time, I think that there is in fact, a strategic need for looking ahead for the long-term consequences. And William also highlighted, and Marlies also pointed out, that it's something that we are going to get back to in the second part of the session too. Thank you very much. So finally, Sandra Matzinger, I hope I'm saying it right. It's a consultant in the Economic Policy Department of the Vienna Chamber of Labor with a focus on energy policy. She had also previously worked as a researcher at the Institute for Social Policy at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. And the floor is all yours. Thank you, Sandra.
Yes, thank you, Ricardo, for this very nice introduction, and thank you also for the invitation, and also to my former speakers, because I think I can some kind of continue what we can do when we now know that this tsunami, and I think this is a really good point and a really nice picture to think about it, what we can do about this tsunami of debts regarding the coming months and even the coming years. So what I'm working on is, we as the Austrian Chamber of Labor, we are the legal representation of 3.5 million employees in Austria, and we're also working, of course, on topics as consumer protection and things like that. Regarding these topics, we are, of course, in a good relationship and always working together with the ministry and the government here in Austria. And what we are trying to push, or what we're trying to advocate for, is we called it the Energy and Climate Aid Fund, which should be some kind of one-stop shop to fight against energy poverty. And on the one hand, this should be a one-stop shop to fight against energy poverty in the short term. But of course, as you all know, and as we all know, energy poverty is also something which lasts very long. And to really combat it in a sustainable way, we also need long-term measures, actually, to really help to get the people out there. What we in Austria see is, interestingly, we do not have problems with disconnection, but let me say it like this: we are one step before the disconnection things. So what we experience is that people have a lot of problems with their final warnings. So it seems that they do not get disconnected by their energy suppliers. It seems that they are still able to find a new provider, but of course this does not solve the problems regarding the energy debts which they have from their former energy provider. So people are still connected, but the question is what will happen in a few months when maybe some savings are not here anymore, when there are still problems regarding the labor market. As you all know, in Austria, we have the highest unemployment rate in history, which we ever had. So what is clear regarding energy poverty is that the COVID-19 situation has, of course, further exacerbated the situation for many households, but especially for energy poor households. And from our point of view, it's clear that they now need special support. Of course, they would have needed the support also before the crisis, but now they really have big troubles to keep their energy and to keep to be connected, or to keep them connected to energy. And we have to focus on them and give them special support. And what is the idea about this fund? Of course, as you can see it here on the slide, is that it should provide a secure and, of course, also affordable energy supply for all citizens and for all people. So how could this one-stop shop look like? What we identified in the Austrian context is that we need two tasks which are really, really important regarding energy poverty. So on the one hand, we would need this interface, which then could focus on supporting network, because what we experience here in Austria is that a lot of organizations from energy suppliers, but also the government on the municipality level, etc., but also social NGOs, etc., they are working on this topic. But the problem is a lot of organizations do not know each other, so they do not know that there are other organizations also working on this topic. And from our point of view, it would be really important to bring them together, to bring them physically together, but also on a, let's say it, electronic platform where they can look up, okay, who deals with energy poverty. If I'm working with consumers who have a problem with energy poverty, whom can I contact, with whom can I work regarding this topic? So from our point of view, it would be really important to support networking all over Austria, because there is already a lot of know-how, but this know-how, unfortunately, is not interconnected. So people do not know from each other. And then on the other hand, of course, the interface should also be some kind of financing mechanism. There are already a lot of support schemes regarding changing the heating system or for thermal renovations. But also, again, it is difficult for income poor or for energy poor households to access these subsidies and to access these measures. So what we can see is that there is especially a problem for them regarding the overall costs for, let's say, internal renovation. So it would be important to some kind of provide a top-up if the basic subsidies are not enough. And this is what this one-stop shop should also be able to do. So it should give information to the people, but also help them to apply for these measures. And then if these already available measures are not enough, then it should also provide some financing scheme on their own to really help them to finance their thermal renovation to 100%. And the second task which these shops should provide is to be some kind of competence center, because as I already mentioned, here in Austria, we already have a lot of know-how. We have a lot of research projects going on. We have a lot of different stakeholders working on this topic, but as I already mentioned, there is not a lot of co-working and not a lot of cooperation, let's say it like this. And also there is a lack of research, especially regarding the phenomenon of hidden energy poverty. So it seems that this is a big topic here in Austria, that people do not consume this kind of energy they would need. So they do not use their heating systems, they do not use electricity as much as they would need it. But of course, we only know it we do not know it from a statistical evidence, let's say it like this. We know it because a lot of social NGOs report this to us, but there is no empirical funding, let's say it like this. And this should be something which should be changed. So we have these two tasks which the fund should actually provide. So be on the one hand an interface to connect and to finance measures, but on the other hand to be some kind of competence center regarding these parts of energy poverty about which we still do not know much about. The next slide, please. Thank you. So from our point of view, it would be important regarding the stakeholders who are dealing with energy poverty that there should be some kind of staff unit between the social ministry and the climate ministry, because what we experience in Austria is that this cooperation does not work well. But of course, energy poverty is not something which we can solve only through social policy measures. We also need energy measures, but of course, only energy measures are also not enough. So it should provide a space where these two ministries can work together, because in both ministries we also have a lot of know-how, but bringing this know-how together and therefore supporting energy poor people would be really important, and could help these households also a lot. So from our point of view, it would also be important to have some kind of coordinated actions, because as I already mentioned, the federal states, but also the municipalities already do a lot to help energy poor households, to assist them. But the problem is that we have to bundle these forces and these resources. So it does not help if anyone in just small towns works on his or her own to help to assist these households. We have some kind of, we have to bring them together, let's say it like this. The biggest problem which we already have in Austria now is that especially for low-income households and also for energy poor households, it's difficult to access any kind of subsidies. So most of the subsidies focus on middle-class households, so changing the heating system and things like that. But of course, it's much more difficult for energy poor households to access these. So this is also what these one-stop shops should provide energy poor households. The idea is that they can go there and ask for help, and that then the fund really guides them through the whole process regarding financing mechanisms, etc., but also regarding all kind of measures which are needed to really change the heating system. So to put it in a short way, in the short term, the idea is, of course, that these funds should help to pay energy bills, to assist the energy poor households in paying their energy bills, to keep them connected. So as I said, we still see that they are connected, but expect that it's going to be a problem in the next month when they do not have any savings anymore. But in the medium term, of course, the fund should also ensure for an affordable and continuous energy supply. So this is also something the fund should focus on. And in the long term, and this is what, from my point of view, is especially important, as I mentioned, energy poverty has been a problem even before the COVID-19 crisis here in Austria. It should guarantee that energy poor households can also participate in the climate neutral future, which we want to achieve in Austria already in 2040. So I think this fund could really help to, on the national level, to improve the situation of energy poor households. I'm working together with the government, and it seems that they are really interested in this kind of idea. So let's see also what will happen in the next month. And of course, I got this idea from the good research which is done all over Europe. Yes, so I think this could also be an interesting idea for other member states. But let's see. I hope that Austria will be some kind of first mover to establish this kind of fund, so that we can see if this really helps people getting out of energy poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. It's really interesting, and I already knew it that your presentation was raising some topics that that some participants would like to intervene, of course, from the activity on the chat. But What I found to be most interesting is the way you see it as a multi-purpose strategic tool, if you want, acting on different dimensions. And I think this is really interesting, and I think there's a lot to discuss here. So thank you very much for your presentation. So I think there is some questions here. I think for Vicky and William, for instance, if you can open your cams for to answer the questions, I would be grateful. Rachel, thank you, Rachel, for the question. Regarding the complaints mentioned by Vicky and William, what is the role of ombudsman in your respective country? Do you work with them? What do you expect or require that for them to help tackle energy poverty, especially in the context of the pandemics?
Shall I?
Maybe yep. William. Yeah, sure.
Okay. So we do have ombuds services in the UK, which energy suppliers sign up to. But the key player in Britain is the regulator, Ofgem, the regulator. They have real powers over the suppliers, and we, at the beginning, Citizens Advice worked with Ofgem and the Trade Association for all the energy companies to agree a sort of set of measures in response to the impact of the pandemic. That included, ban disconnections, stopping disconnections, although I have to say disconnections are fairly small in Britain anyway, about 10, 20 a year now. So, but probably of more importance was agreement to not chase debt. But as I said, it only sort of put debt into a long grass, as they say. Suppliers still intended to recover the debt, but they wouldn't chase it immediately for the first 6 months of the pandemic. And also to put measures in place to support prepayment meter consumers. So we have a large number of consumers who pay for fuel by prepayment meter. So that, as I said earlier, they don't keep their prepayment meters topped up. They're in effect disconnect themselves. So the suppliers put in various measures to try and keep them on supply. And what has increased massively, as I mentioned, is the supply of what we call fuel vouchers. So this basically gives somebody some emergency supply to keep them on supply for the next, say, month or whatever. And that there are usually limits on how many vouchers a consumer can have. So those are the sorts of measures that we've put in place, and some of those Ofgem has now made long term in terms of it's a requirement on energy companies to provide support to prepayment consumers, to try and make sure they're not self-disconnecting, to to make sure that when they recover debt, that they try to reflect the ability to pay. I think our evidence has shown that a lot of people just do not have the finances, so ability to pay would in sometimes mean they couldn't pay anything. So that's the issue that's we're going to have to get to grips with over the next sort of short medium term period.
Thank you, William. I think Vicky also answered, but if you want just some
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Also in Greece, we are very strong participation with all the authorities, relevant authorities, also the energy providers and observers. Also, we have special tools concerning this approaching, and our goals is to improve the consumer protection, addressing consumer vulnerability, also promoting sustainable consumption. And consumers should be encouraged to become actors in the green transition. This requires innovative solution and adequate also legal framework promoting long product lifespans and repairability, appropriate information and consumer also education. Sustainable consumption should not be dependent on income, but also be accessible for everyone, also for the vulnerable ones. Also, with strengthening the law enforcement through authorities and consumer organizations who promote meaningful participations through all the bodies, public bodies here. And we want to intensify cooperation between also in Europe level. And we are also sharing the same tools, because energy problem and energy poverty problem is the same in all European countries, and sharing the best practice and the same tools who can help also the consumer to find the most suitable solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sadly, we are out of time for more. I would like to thank our speakers again for the brilliant interventions. Encourage everyone to join us later at the bar for more conversations if you can.
And we've just heard 4 very interesting speakers explaining what has been going on with COVID in their specific countries. And the idea is that for the second part of the session, we take the debate a little bit wider to Europe. And one of the things that we will do is to have an interactive session whereby you are also asked to share your own ideas and impressions on what has been happening with COVID in Europe. So what have been the impacts on different households, what type of measures have been taken, but also what is indeed necessary to go forward. So what should not be done just only in short-term measures, but also in terms of the longer-term perspective, and maybe also dealing with some of these issues that have been brought up by the previous speaker. And so what about these tsunamis of deaths, or how to deal with disconnection bans that have been ongoing for a longer time and maybe need to be continued, or maybe need to be changed or amended. So these would be things that we are very interested to discuss with you during this session. The idea is that we will first have a short presentation by myself of the so-called COVID-19 energy map, which I will explain a little bit more about in a minute. Hopefully you have seen the introduction video that was made on it, and it was also sent by email. But we will share some further insights from the map before we actually go to the interactive part, which will consist of a number of breakout groups, whereby you will be asked to join according to regional interest in 4 groups, or 5 groups, I think even, to discuss with people from that region and about that region what have been the main bottlenecks and the main challenges there, what have been the main responses, but also what is lacking and what should be changed. So maybe this is also a good moment to already ask everybody that was not there during the first part of the first session and who didn't vote in terms of what type of region they are interested in to participate in later in the session. Feel free to type that in the chat, so the tech team knows in what type of group to put you. Maybe to briefly summarize, the regions that we have is Northern Europe, the Mediterranean area, Central Europe, and Eastern Europe. And it's a bit loosely defined, so you can decide yourself where you want to go. We also have a 5th group, which is non-Europe. So if you are from outside of Europe, there's also a group for you. Yeah, so just that we know that. About getting started, I will explain how this works in more detail in a minute. First, let's go to the COVID energy map. You can already see it here on the screen. It is a project that was started by a group of Engager researchers somewhere at the start of the pandemic. I think we started seriously debating it from April and May, when it turned out that, of course, also in the Engager network, there was a lot of interest about trying to figure out what the impact of COVID was, but also what the response is and what could be done to actually prevent people from sliding further into poverty or energy poverty, or maybe also preventing households that were not energy poor before from becoming energy poor. And one of the things that emerged from the discussions and the collaboration was this idea to look indeed into these different measures. And that led to the collection of many measures and the collation of them on this COVID energy map. The map itself is mostly constructed and researched by 4 persons. That is, besides myself, Anaïs Farho, Harriet Thompson, and Rachel Couillet. They will also be with us later in the session for some of the moderation. But we have received also input from the wider Engager network. And at present, there are also some student assistants of the University of Groningen mostly, assisting in doing research on some parts of the maps that are more difficult in terms of linguistic access. So we have some people looking into Arab countries, but also in Asia, and some further people also looking at the African continent. I think one of the students is here, if I saw correctly, Michael. So welcome. And the idea is that the map in that sense has as wide as possible a geographic spread as possible. But we've also realized that with extensions of measures, it has become a little bit more difficult to find all the examples and all the updates. So we're very grateful for any help in this respect. That also counts for anybody in the group here. So if you know that there is a measure missing or that there's something that you're interested in that you would like to contribute on, please be in touch. So the plan for today was to actually share a number of our lessons from the map, or some things that we have found striking when we started working with the map and when we started mapping. Because there's many lessons to be drawn from the map and many different examples of measures. There are so far nearly 370 different pins, and I can show you what that looks like on the Google Map platform where we have actually mapped them. So it's a very rich database of different measures in that sense. And one of the things that we found most striking in a general sense is that the fact that measures have been taken in so many different parts of the world, in so many different countries, to us really shows that there is a clear recognition during COVID of the importance of access to energy services. And it's already been mentioned a couple of times that COVID has really revealed the importance of a safe house with basic services, and amongst those services also energy for health, for warmth, for well-being, for access to ICTs, for study, for work. So it's a good example of how governments, regulators, and utilities have all come together to try to make sure that people have continuous and affordable supplies. And for us, this was maybe also a reason to ask, so is this actually evidence of the idea of that energy should be somehow a right or a human right? And is there need to maybe regulate that even better or secure that even better? So besides these more general lessons, we also have some more specific lessons or specific striking things that we saw. A first thing that I wanted to draw attention to is the fact that disconnection bans proved one of the most popular measures that were implemented around the world, although we see them quite heavily concentrated in the US and in Europe, actually. So that's quite interesting. And this could be explained by the fact that I will show you in a minute that actually bill relief programs, so discounts and free energy, have been more widely implemented in the global south as a way of dealing with affordability issues and with access issues. So this is the first interesting finding. The second finding is that we saw that the disconnection bans and deferred payment plans or delayed payment plans are often not implemented in the same area at the same time, because we realized that they have probably the same function. They both are intended to protect against disconnections due to inability to pay. So either you are subject to a disconnection ban, and that means that maybe for that moment there is less need to pay, but it doesn't indeed affect your debt and your payment burden. Whereas for a delayed payment scheme, it counts the same. You maybe have to pay at a later time, which means that you cannot be disconnected for the moment, but you still have to pay at one point. So in this sense, it's very true what William and some of the others have said. It's not really about bill relief. If you look carefully, there are actually some places where a disconnection ban and a payment plan has been introduced in the same area. And I think this is quite interesting because here it's very visible that this has to do with the longer term perspectives of COVID. And I can share some examples from that, because especially in Latin America, it is quite visible that disconnection bans that were implemented at the first beginning of COVID were also immediately complemented by quite long-term repayment plans, precisely, I guess, because it was realized that due to the disconnection bans, people may be building up debt and there needed to be some type of help with this. And the repayment periods can be quite generous there. So in Chile, for example, the repayment period is up to 12 months. But in Peru, it can even be up to 2 years, 24 months. In Ecuador, it is also 12 months, but in Colombia, it is even up to 3 years for some subscribers, the most vulnerable ones within the lowest consumption ranges. For those in slightly higher consumption ranges, there is still an opportunity to pay back over 2 years. This is quite a long term. If we look at the US, we see also delayed payment plans emerging, also quite long ones, but at a slightly later moment in time in relation to these disconnection bans. And there the periods also can be up to 12 months, for example, in Louisiana or in California. but also even up to 2 years in Oregon. And I'm not sure if we've seen already these types of long-term perspectives in Europe yet, but I think this would be an interesting thing to consider. Another interesting observation is that in some places the disconnection bans have been really in place for a very long time, sometimes even year-round, and they are still in place today. So from the beginning of the crisis up until now, people have been protected against disconnections. This could be a great thing, but if it's not coupled to meaningful payment supports, this can also be quite dangerous due to this debt tsunami issue. So in that sense, it is quite interesting that also, again, in the United States particularly, we see that subsidies, discounts, and lump sum payments are being offered to people to actually offer this bill relief, and the same counts for bill waivers. But this is really something from the last months, let's say since October, November, December, that these measures have begun to come up. If we look at the Global South, we can see that discounts and subsidies have been much more part of the general response to COVID, also from the beginning, and that in some cases their schemes have also been in place for a very long time up until this moment. So let's say a year long, since the beginning of the crisis, people were able to get quite substantial discounts, and schemes have been in place up until this moment, for example, in Thailand, in Panama, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And if we look, for example, at what that scheme looks like in Panama, we can see it's quite generous, right? So in Panama, those households consuming between 0 and 300 kilowatt hours were entitled to 50% reductions, whereas there was an entitlement to 30% reduction when you were consuming between 300 and 1,000 kilowatt hours. And even in the first bracket, up until 300 kilowatt hours, that included 70% of all the consumers in Panama. And together with the 30% increase, it would cover about 95% of all the Panama consumers. So you can see it's quite generous, and I don't think this is something that we have really seen in the context of Europe yet so far. That brings me actually to the US, because this is where we have seen some of these interesting bill relief programs coming up. And like I said, quite generous sometimes, but also quite diverse. And I wanted to briefly show a few examples there. So for example, in North Dakota, people have been recently become eligible for payment, lump sum payments of $460 specifically for energy. This is funded by a federal assistance program where actually states can apply for further COVID money to actually have assistance programs in the context of energy specifically to help out the people within their state. But there's quite a bit of discretion. So whereas in North Dakota, this led to an amount of $460, in Iowa, people can actually apply for up to $2,000 to pay both water, natural gas, and electric bills. So it's really quite a lot of money. I saw that in the chat there were already issues raised in terms of who pays for this. And this is also a question that has come up in our sessions before. And what about the fact that this relies very much on public budgets and maybe bringing up the need for austerity measures later on. Also here, I think the US shows some interesting examples. Because in Michigan, for example, there was a quite generous relief package, again, for energy assistance. But the utilities that were making use of that assistance also participated in bill waiver programs. And together, these utilities waived up to 25% of all the outstanding debts, which together amounted to nearly $5 million. So this is quite a generous and quite a substantial intervention on the part of the utilities as well. In Washington, on the other hand, the regulator took a more proactive approach and decided that all utilities have to contribute to a COVID-19 relief fund up to 1% of their revenue. So not their profit, but their revenue, and thereby also making the companies co-responsible for actually dealing with the aftermath of COVID. And I think that those are very interesting things to think about and to explore, potentially also in the context of Europe. That brings me finally to Europe, where we see a very mixed bag of measures, I think, being undertaken. They are mixed in the sense that the duration of measures in Europe has been very varied. Most of the measures actually have been relatively short, I think. They've been mostly adopted for 3 or 4 months at the start of the crisis. There have been some examples of longer measures, including a year-long disconnection ban in France, for example. But overall, it's quite mixed. The same counts for the type of actors that are involved. We see both governments, regulators, and companies taking actions on different types of measures, including disconnection bans, subsidies, tariff cuts, delayed payment arrangements. It seems that in Eastern Europe, companies are actually playing quite a big role in this context, also in giving some type of discounts. So an important question for the COVID aftermath could be, what is the role of these actors in actually also making sure that people continue to have access to energy after COVID? So what is their role in sort of perhaps ensuring that people indeed have access to energy as a right, potentially, and also ensuring that this right to continuous, affordable, high quality, necessary energy services is also maintained after the crisis, because apparently during the crisis, a lot of things have become possible. As a final comment I want to raise is what type of shortcomings has COVID revealed in terms of how our energy systems are currently organized? What makes it that people are so vulnerable, and how would it be possible to maybe increase people's self-sufficiency and their resilience to these types of shocks? So are there things from the COVID map or from the COVID responses that are good practices, that are lessons, that are things that we want to keep, but are there also things that need further change? And as a final point, we have observed from the map that there are actually very limited COVID-related measures related to energy efficiency so far, or renewable energy, or self-generation, or even when it comes to off-grid energy supplies. So maybe these are things these are gaps that indeed need to be sort of considered or addressed or remedied, also in a similar way that Sandra has been presenting before the break. So I think these are some of the measures or some of the lessons that we have seen. There's much more to say about it. So if you have any questions about it, would be happy to know. Feel free to also address these questions to the others in the group that have worked on the map. So Harriet, Rochelle, and I think Anaïs should also be here. And we hope to have a publication out on this soon as well. So before I introduce the micro board and the exercise, maybe it's good to check if there are any questions actually. And maybe I can ask actually to Ricardo if there have been any discussions in the chat, because I wasn't able to see it while I was giving the presentation.
No, not yet. I think that there's no discussion yet. Maybe a little later. I think we can check a little later. Yeah. Okay,
good. I do see an interesting comment by Catherine that maybe the map could have a layer on negative bad practices. So indeed, what does it mean when there are no measures taken? Yeah, that's a great question, Catherine, and I think it would be something that's perfect to discuss for your breakout groups. So let me see, I can bring up the micro boards, which by now most of you hopefully should be familiar with, but maybe some of you are still joining for the first time in the forum. So if you go to the micro board, and I hope that the link is shared in the chat, you will see all the different boards of the day, but also the board of day 5, where we have developed a sort of brainstorming space in terms of 2 questions that we hope that you can discuss in your geographic groups and that you can share your ideas on with us. So the first question that we want to ask each of the breakout groups is, for that region, what do you consider any striking geographical specificities or practices or bottlenecks when it comes to addressing energy poverty in the context of COVID-19? Because we can see that there are these clear geographical differences in terms of the response, but can we explain where this comes from? Is this because there is no prior history of thinking about energy poverty? Is it maybe because energy markets have responded in a certain way? Are there political issues involved? It is up to you, but we are very curious to hear from you what you think in your region are important aspects that are shaping the response to COVID in a certain way or not. And if you have any insights on that, you can put your post-its here in the first, let's say, circle. So every region has 2 circles, and you can simply add your comments by clicking on a post-it and editing it. The second question is related to recommendations. So what is next? What would be still important short-term measures that need to be taken, but also what is the long-term solution? What should be changed? What should be added? Are there any good examples of current COVID responses that we may want to keep or want to reinforce? And again, we would love to hear that also context specific. So perhaps there are different things necessary in different regions. Breakout rooms were not disrupted too abruptly, but at the same time that you had good discussions and did not finish yet. I saw some interesting post-its appear on the board. So the plan is to actually invite some of the moderators of the groups to give a brief wrap-up and some reflection on the post-its with the rest of the groups. And each of the groups had a moderator, except for the group on non-Europe, but we found somebody willing there to also give some feedback, so that's great. We will start with Northern Europe, which was moderated by one of the co-authors of the map, which is Harriet Thompson. So Harriet, when you're ready, I would like to ask you to come in and share with us what you were discussing.
Sure thing. Can everyone hear okay? Perfect. So in terms of the current measures that are there, there's obviously quite a noticeable gap at the top around the Nordic countries. So Denmark, Norway, Sweden, no measures there at all. And this kind of this mirrors some trends we see within wider social policies as well. So they tend to kind of fall back on the default that the situation before was, the well-supported consumers. We thought that there is probably something quite interesting about the Northern European grouping, that is one of the most privatized sets of energy markets, if we particularly think of like the UK and France. And so there's, whilst there's a variety of approaches, there's quite a lot of fragmentation, and it's not necessarily kind of universal for everyone. And then there was some discussion around people having delays in actually receiving support. So when, firstly kind of knowing that you need support and then actually being eligible and receiving it at the end. So those were the kind of the main headline discussions from our group.
Great, thanks. And I think one of the things that we had been discussing while we were working on the map indeed as well is like what is going on in Northern Europe? What is, for example, going on in Scandinavia? Is it because there is a lack of discourse on these issues? Is there a lack of need for measures? Or one thing that I guess I didn't explain in the presentation as well, we really have looked at measures that were taken during the COVID crisis in response to COVID. So it could be that in some areas there are already some type of support measures in place, or that there are other mechanisms at work that maybe protect people sufficiently. So there could indeed be different explanations. And I think the map raises some of these things in a very interesting and provocative way. So let me move to Eastern Europe and Central Europe then, where I think there was an issue in the sense that the both groups were joined together. So I had the impression that Central and Eastern Europe were one big group. And in that group, Rachel should have been there. So maybe I can call on Rachel what has been discussed in her group.
Thank you, Marlies. I was actually in the Central Europe, whereas I should have been in Eastern Europe. And I don't have the feeling that we had people from Eastern Europe together with us. So I don't know. There was a bit of an issue with the breakout room. But for Central Europe, so we discussed mainly the Austrian, the German, and the French case, because we had representative of these three countries. We talked a lot about the ban on disconnection. This was something introduced in all the countries, but with the variation in duration, relatively short in Austria and Germany, much longer in France. But the French examples also show that despite the ban on disconnection, there was not 100% reduction in the number of disconnection. So it means a ban on disconnection doesn't mean that vulnerable households or households are not disconnected during this ban. Another issue that was raised was about the regulation of the some sector of the market, like in the Austrian case, our colleagues raised the fact that with the district heating, for example, people don't have the choice to switch suppliers. They are stuck with their district heating supplier with unregulated, I mean, there is a lack of regulation in that case. So we have some issues with the regulation here. Another point that was raised was about the narratives that we show in this regulation part, meaning that the behavior of the people is a problem and that we have to educate them, kind of, on the energy bill. So we gave the example, for example, in many cases, for example, they consider the disconnection as a way to raise people awareness so that they behave properly once they know that they are going to be connected in X days, depending on the regulation of the country. And we ended up, and that was frustrated because we were just starting the discussion about the past dependency. One of our hypotheses was to say that these differences between our countries was probably explained by the past dependency of the market, of the energy sector, of the regulations, of the narratives, of the welfare system, etc. So these were the final points discussed here.
Thanks, Rachel. And I was wondering, because your group was very creative with a drawing there, was there any reason for putting it there?
Well, so
Who was with us?
Louisa.
Louisa, exactly. Okay, I'm not sure if that's Louisa's drawing, but I was curious if you had an explanation for that one.
No, it's not. I'm sorry, I put it there. It basically points to the common circumstance that the small people are always fined and they always get you if you're not very powerful, but the big companies always get away. So that's a German saying die Kleinen hängt man, die Großen lässt man laufen. I don't know in English, so.
Thanks, Catherine. I was wondering whether it was yours, but that clarifies. Thanks. So with that, I would like to ask the Mediterranean group to share their thoughts. And for that, we have Ricardo, who can hopefully come in and share their discussions.
Yes. So we had, can you hear me? Yes. Yeah. So we had a very nice discussion regarding mainly the challenges that we face in Southern Europe, and we agreed that low energy performance of building stock is one of the most significant ones. And as a consequence, energy renovation funding and regulation that allows for upscaling upscaling energy renovation of buildings and improving buildings. It's one of the measures that should be uptaken both on short and long-term perspective. So the other constraints that we identified is the fact that consumers don't have energy literacy, don't know a lot of times don't know how to read energy bills, for instance. There is also regulation constraints. For instance, the case of energy communities regulation in Spain being delayed. That can cause for some constraints in terms of alleviating energy poverty. And we also, in that regard, we also identified energy communities as one of the solutions in order to alleviate this kind of problem. Also taking advantage of availability of natural resources like sun, for instance. The other thing that we identified as a constraint is not having a human right perspective on energy. I mean, the question is, most of the times the issue is raised in technical terms and not as a human right, if you want. And yeah, I think that's all. I think for our discussion. I think we had a lot more to discuss, but the time was short. Thank you.
Thanks, Ricardo. Luckily, we will have the bar for that later as well, so that's great. And then for the last group that was divided was the non-European group, where we had two participants from Brazil and from Ethiopia, actually. And one of them is Michael, who was so generous to actually share some of their thoughts and maybe also share some of his own thoughts, because he is one of the persons that has been helping out with doing some research for the COVID energy map, especially across Africa. So Michael, go ahead.
Thank you, Marlies. There was only the two of us in that group, so what we discussed about was measures taken in Brazil and in Ethiopia. So in Brazil, there was this free energy scheme for 3 months, but now it has been stopped. And also the gas prices there are increasing. So that's also contributing to the problem there. And in Ethiopia, yeah, as it's known, it's a developing country, and we don't have that much people are not covered by electricity. But despite that fact, the government has tried to take some measures when it issued a state of emergency when the pandemic hit. So one of the measures was that it established this team in the companies that provides electricity, that this is an emergency team. So whenever there is a connection problem, this emergency team will be dispatched to deal with it. So these are the main things that we discussed about.
Thanks for your intervention. Great. So we asked you for regional discussions, and I think regional discussions is what we got. I was trying to see if I could find some general sense in the debate. Maybe this is also a good moment to see and ask if we can indeed bring up day 5's graphic recording, because we have at each day Louisa in the background trying to sort of put a string or find a red thread in our discussions, whereby she's sometimes even able to capture it much better than I would be able to capture it myself, because there's sometimes so much going on that you think, oh, that's interesting, but it's her task to really try to bring all the things together. So this is indeed the graphic recording of our debate, which I think captures nicely the Northern European part, the Mediterranean part, and the Central European part. I guess non-Europe was not finished yet. If I have to draw some connections myself, I think it is indeed very important to realize that discussions about universal energy access or about energy poverty take part, and they develop, and they have the origin in specific domestic systems, energy systems, legal systems, political systems, historical systems, which will make some systems more amenable to have these types of measures implemented or not. Also the question of path dependencies. So what is each country's own trajectory in trying to come to some level of an idea of a right to energy, or an idea of universal access or universal services or universal affordability. And the measures may also respond to specific situations in the country where some people may not have access to grids at all cases, so including, for example, to these gas grids. But it is also about trying to figure out how the response to COVID can get a long-term perspective when it comes to maybe finding a way of addressing the problem of people to power. I'm trying to sum it up. It's not so easy, I find. But what I take away is that also from what was emerging from the groups is that there needs to be some empowerment for people in terms of energy literacy, extra information, knowledge about their own consumption, being able to stand up also to energy companies, to claim certain types of access, and that then there is a different role for the government, but also maybe potentially for different other actors, such as utilities, even in some cases also regulators, to step in and to take action where that's needed. But it's both a question of demanding action and really establishing that people need access and that they maybe need some support, but that they also need to be empowered. And then the question of how can you respond to that, not just now, but also in the long term, and keeping in mind the need for energy efficiency, renewable energy, and maybe these energy transitions where also the role of energy communities come in. Again, like I said, difficult to sum up. With that, I would maybe actually go to the final end of our forum, whereby I first want to finish this session and thank all the speakers of the first section. So that is Vicky, William, that was Carolina, and I'm trying to have the list here. I'm forgetting somebody. It's very tiring at the end of 5 days. I'm sorry, who am I forgetting? Sandra, yes, I'm so sorry. So thanks to Ricardo for the hosting, and thanks for the moderation in the second part, and to all the participants for participating. We will now have a moment where I will ask Catherine Grossman to take the floor. She has been one of the main organizers of the forum, and she will share a few words with us over the conclusion for the last 5 days. What have we learned from these debates on the right to energy in the different days? And I'm very curious to hear what will be her conclusions. We have been having some chats in the bar, so I know that we have been discussing many different things. I'm very curious to hear some of your final takeaways. And of course, also much thanks to you for taking the initiative. And I look forward to seeing you all further in the bar. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Marlies. And please stay with us for another 3 minutes. I would really like to not only share my little takeaways, but also I have a final big thank you to make. And I really would love people to stay and do that with us. So in the beginning on Monday, I told you that we organized this forum because we wanted to clarify what a right to energy could look like in practice. And because we are a group of academics rather than activists, this forum might have taken a more, or at least started with a very academic exercise, asking for the nature of energy, what is it, why is it important, and then going through all those different aspects of the past 5 days until today, the worries about tsunamis, as we have heard, problems piling up through the current situation with the pandemic. Okay, key lessons, very personal maybe, so maybe other people take different key lessons. For me, one big thing was to much better understand that the nature of energy is actually making it difficult to advocate for a right to energy, because water is water, housing is housing, but energy is so many things. It's not the coal, it's not the natural gas, the sun, the wind. It's much more difficult. So if we say a right to energy, we address all the systems of energy provision, all the infrastructure, the institutions dealing with it, the companies making money or not with it. And that is what a right to energy actually needs to address, and put that in one phrase. That's very, very difficult. So I think the big challenge is to trace this way from energy being a commodity to how it becomes energy being a commons, sorry for that, how it becomes then a private property, a commodity on the market, and how do the injustices and humiliations that we want to address occur on this way. And I think this is where we need to focus on. The second big takeaway is the role of narratives. Even though I'm a sociologist and the power of discourse is actually well known to me, I think this week led to a much deeper insight into how the narratives are obstacles in itself. The idea of the unworthy poor, of the power of property rights. People are self-responsible. A lot of charity in the advocation of a right to energy, instead of a more proud and equal pronunciation and framing. So the rights discourse might be one way here to politicize this debate. And I think we do need a lot of politicization, even in our own networks. And the third one, a right to energy, is one step, but it won't solve the more systemic problems. So I said we need to change the discourse. We need to also address power relations. We've been talking a lot about that, including the pun that energy and power in English are actually one and the same word. So to do so, I think we need more clarity, much more clarity about the complexities here. I found very inspiring how, or let's say encouraging to go along these lines, how Frick yesterday from FEANZA pointed to the, I would say, policy lullabies. So the idea of optimism, of addressing ecological and social questions with the same instruments and the same policies, and then realizing that in the end, no, the funds are taken away, priorities are always given to green growth instead of social justice and social ecological justice, and we need to better uncover these policy lullabies and dismantle the seeming win-win expectations. Can we do that? Let's go to the graphic recording of day 2, upper right corner. There it says, oh, Luisa is doing that. Don't underestimate the power of civil society. That might be an encouraging notion here. And if we want to address the inequalities, we need to advocate the non-profit sector. And this leads me to another big issue that I want to highlight with this forum, because this forum was organized in a way that tried to do this, to advocate non-profit. All the setup of this forum, from a technical perspective, did that. We said advocate non-profit, and the forum demonstrated how we can more independent from the private corporations, and also not just energy services can become independent, but those digital services too. You might have noticed we use a different software than you normally have with those online meetings and conferences. Big Blue Button is a free and open source software, and we're using this one hosted by Colocall, a collective enterprise that doesn't collect your data, different from Zoom. We also used an alternative streaming provider, which is video stream hosting instead of the additional YouTube, and we used self-hosted email lists. We used WordPress plugin instead of Google Forms. And this all has been made possible by a team that has been invisible by now, but I would really love you to switch on your cameras. Please, Clemens, Lynn, Konrad, Luisa, Christian, Yanni, could you maybe show yourself, and let's please provide a round of applause to our tech team, which is not just a tech team, but the designer of this very, very beautiful forum, which will remain visible also after the forum. Yes. Thank you so much for making this very critical, technical, for taking care of making this a different event than the usual Zoom events. Thank you. Right, and that's now the moment when we probably will switch off from this room. But as Ricardo and Marlies have announced a couple of times already today, this doesn't mean the end of the discussion, but rather the invitation to go grab a drink, maybe a snack, and meet us in the bar. Those who are with us first time today, the bar is designed in a way that you can have a private conversation, so you don't have to stay in the main bar. You can ask us for private tables if you like, if there's something you want to talk individually, or you can, of course, do join us in the main bar. So you enter this via the website, and if you don't find your way, we're glad to help you and bring you to the bar. And I think the link is already in the chat. So I'll probably stop talking here and see you in a minute over there.